I said no once, and that was enough for him to cut me off from my family. My name is Helena Vasquez. I am 31 years old, I live in Santa Barbara, California, and I have a law degree. I have been working as a public defender for almost 5 years, and even though I deal with heartbreaking injustices on a daily basis, nothing prepared me for the injustice that came from within my own home, from my own father. My father, Armando Vasquez, was always a man with an imposing presence. A former military man, successful businessman, and known in the neighborhood as someone with a firm word and traditional values. My younger brother Lucas and I grew up under strict rules, inflexible schedules, and a silent pressure that was suffocating. My mother, Dolores, was the opposite of him. Sweet, generous, passionate about classical music and gardening. She was the bridge between my world and his, between affection and discipline. But when she passed away 7 years ago, the bridge collapsed. All that remained was the echo of my father's authority, and the shadow of a favoritism that, until then, I had refused to see. Lucas had always been Dad's golden boy. Even with his mistakes, his jobs changing every semester, the debts he pretended not to see, and the arrogance with which he treated any criticism. To my father, he was just a young man looking for his place in the world. As for me, with my degree, my own apartment, and my financial stability, I was seen as someone distant, too harsh, with no time for family. But I tried. Birthdays, phone calls, Christmas at home, even after exhausting weeks of work. I was always there. Till that Sunday in March when my father called me to a family lunch with an unusual air of solemnity. Our childhood home was exactly as my mother had left it. The pictures, the china, the smell of lavender. But there was something different in the air, a tension that made me feel like I was about to be judged. And I was. "Helena, I need you to sign these documents," he said after dessert, sliding a brown folder across the living room table. "Your grandfather left that land in Montecito to you, but it would be more useful if it were to Lucas. He's starting a business, and this capital could ensure its success." I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But the expression on his face, cold, practical, almost impersonal, froze any reaction I had. "You want me to transfer my inheritance to Lucas?" I asked, still trying to remain calm. "It's not a matter of wanting, it's a matter of family vision. He needs it. You don't." That sentence cut me like a knife. You don't need it. As if my efforts, my struggle, my sleepless nights, everything was irrelevant in the face of my brother's convenience. As if my independence was a punishment and not an achievement. "I'm not signing this, Dad. I'm sorry. This is wrong." The room fell silent. Even Lucas lowered his gaze. But my father? He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and just muttered, "You'll regret it." And he kept his promise. In a way I never imagined. Sometimes I wonder when my place in the family began to disappear. Not abruptly, but like someone slowly blowing out a candle until only the smell of smoke remains. Growing up in the Vasquez household was like living in a barracks disguised as a home. Mornings began at 6 a.m. sharp, with my father marching down the hall and tapping lightly on the doors. "Discipline builds character," he would say. While other kids slept late in the summer, Lucas and I made to-do lists, did extra homework, and spent long afternoons organizing the yard under Armando's watchful eye. At first, it wasn't so hard. I had always been studious, determined, perhaps even eager to please. My mother, Dolores, said I had an old soul, one of those people who are born with a sense of responsibility. And with her lightheartedness, was the perfect balance for that rigid environment. She would sit with me to bake cookies, even though she knew my father hated the smell of vanilla throughout the house. She would hide little notes in my notebooks with messages like, "You are the daughter every mother dreams of having," or "Never forget who you are." She was the one who encouraged me to study law, even when my father said that law was for people who like to fight. With Lucas, it was different. He was always more impulsive, more rebellious, and, ironically, more forgiven. He broke rules, talked back, got warnings at school, and received a pat on the back and a ready excuse. "He's just finding his way," a phrase I never heard said about me. In my teens, the comparisons started to hurt more. I got good grades, participated in school competitions, won scholarships, but he was the one who got the applause at the dinner table. "Lucas has charisma," my father would say. "People like him. That's worth more than a report card." The first time I heard that, I wanted to cry. The second time, I just shut my mouth. When I started college, I already felt that something had broken. My contact with my father became formal. He would respond with, okay, or a nod. The absence of praise or affection became so common that I almost accepted it as part of my DNA. But my mother, she was my anchor. She sent me breakfast baskets during exam week, wrote handwritten letters, told me she loved me as if that were enough to heal any wound. And for a while, it was, till the day she got sick. Pancreatic cancer, fast, unfair, devastating. I remember the day she called me into her room and held my hand so tightly that her nails dug into my skin. Promise me you'll stay strong, Helena. Even if everything around you seems to be falling apart, I promised. And I kept my promise. I took care of her until her last breath. I was responsible for hospital admissions, medications, insurance paperwork. Lucas couldn't handle it. He said hospitals made him nervous. And my father shut himself off like a fortress under siege. He spent hours staring into space, locked in his office. When my mother left, something in me left too. But it wasn't just sadness. It was a deep sense that I was alone, completely alone, even surrounded by my family. At the funeral, as I held her picture in my lap, I heard my father whisper to a distant cousin, "Helena is strong. She can handle it." As if that were a compliment. As if being strong were my only function. It was the day after the funeral that he handed me a folder with some documents. "Your grandfather's things. He left you some land. Take care of it for me." I gave it to my trusted lawyer and got on with my life. Little did I know that that small piece of land would be the center of a war that was yet to come. Exclusion never comes all at once. It creeps up on you, sneaky, with forced smiles and long silences. And you only notice the hole when you're already in it, trying to remember the exact moment when they started digging. After my mother's death, the family dynamic didn't just change, it fell apart. Phone calls became fewer, invitations became scarce, and Sunday gatherings that once seemed mandatory became meetings where I felt like a last-minute guest. Lucas started visiting my father frequently. They had barbecues together, took short fishing trips, even bought matching Dodgers jerseys. I saw the photos on social media with a lump in my throat. Sometimes I was tagged in a group post, as if my presence was implied. But it wasn't. I wasn't there, and no one called to ask why. Once, on my father's 70th birthday, I arrived with a gift he had always wanted. A restored antique edition of a rare military book that my mother had mentioned years earlier. It took me almost 3 months to find. When I gave it to him, he didn't even open it. "You didn't have to spend money on that. Lucas already gave me a bracelet with our family crest. Look." He showed me my brother's gift with a twinkle in his eye. A cheap, obviously generic bracelet, but it had Vasquez engraved on it. He remembered our last name. That's valuable. That night, as everyone toasted and laughed, I realized that my presence there was just a formality. I was part of the decor. Polite, respectful, invisible. The veiled comments began shortly after. "Helena is too busy for these things. She likes her own world, more reserved. Lucas is more family-oriented, words spoken lightly, as if they were compliments. But I read between the lines. She doesn't belong here anymore." And then came the requests disguised as favors. My father only called me when he needed help reviewing documents or sorting something out with the bank. Never to ask how I was doing. Never to ask about my work, my quiet victories in court, the young people I was helping to rebuild their lives. Lucas, on the other hand, was celebrated even when he failed. He opened an electronics store and went bankrupt in less than a year. My father called it market experience. Then he tried a food truck, which lasted 6 months. "Courage to try," he said. I tried not to resent him. After all, he was my brother. And somewhere in my heart there was still the Helena, who grew up sharing the last piece of cake with him, who helped him with his homework, who slept on the floor of his room when he was afraid of thunder. But the hole between us grew, and the respect I carried inside me seemed to find no reflection on the other side. The last straw came when I was informed by a coworker, not by my family, that my father was setting up a limited company in Lucas's name. The project was a high-end auto center, financed in part with the assets inherited from my grandfather, the same inheritance that included the land he wanted me to give him. I confronted my father on a cold April night, in the same office where he spent hours locked away. He greeted me with the impersonal tone of an accountant. You don't understand, Helena. This is for the good of the family. You already have your own life. Lucas needs a chance. And you want to take it away from me to give it to him? He took a deep breath. It's just a piece of paper. You sign it, he develops it, and everyone wins. I left that house with my eyes burning, my heart pounding in my ears. For the first time, I felt that I wasn't just being ignored. I was being discarded, and no one seemed to care. There's a huge difference between being alone and being left alone. One is a choice, the other is exclusion. And I was beginning to realize that in my family, my independence was seen as a threat. Something to be controlled, silenced, pruned, until there was nothing left but what was convenient for them. After my last conversation with my father, I spent weeks trying to sort out my emotions. Part of me still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that he didn't realize how much his words hurt. But the signs were piling up like an avalanche about to collapse. It started with passive-aggressive messages in the family group chat. Helena, if you want to attend the meeting about the auto center plans, Lucas can fill you in. As if I were his assistant. Then came the indirect messages through aunts, cousins, and even neighbors. Your father commented that you've been very harsh with your brother. Lucas said you seem cold lately. You should be more present, after all. You're his only daughter. But what ate away at me the most was how everything seemed deliberately designed to destabilize me. The pressure increased every week. My father went so far as to send a formal email with a copy to a family lawyer, requesting that I review, with common sense and a spirit of unity, the transfer of the land in question. When I refused again, he didn't respond. Lucas called me 2 days later, pretending to be surprised. Come on, Helena. I thought you would understand. Dad said you were willing? That hit me hard. I, who had carried the family on my back when my mother fell ill. I, who had been responsible, stable, helpful. Now I was just a pawn to be pushed around on their board. The consequences of my refusal were not long in coming. First, I lost access to the family safe, something symbolic, but painful. Inside were some mementos of my mother. Letters, simple jewelry she said she wanted me to wear on my wedding day, an old cassette tape with her singing Moon River. When I asked for the key, my father replied curtly, "Those things now belong to the family, and you're moving too far away to understand what that means." Then, without warning, I was removed from the informal partnership we had in a small rental property inherited from my grandmother, an investment I had managed myself for 4 years. I found out through an email from an accountant. We inform you that, by decision of the majority shareholder, your name has been removed from the list of participants. Another subtle attempt to silence me, to force me to give in. The worst part? The emotional manipulation that followed. Late-night calls from relatives saying that my father was very upset about everything, that he cried when he talked about me. Lucas sending me old photos of us, captioned with, "Remember this? There's still time to fix things." And my godmother, who had always been neutral, calling me to ask, "Can't you be the adult in this situation?" Be the adult? I already was. I always had been. But at that point, I started to doubt myself. I began avoiding confrontation and stopped responding to messages. I slept poorly and had trouble working. I felt like I was fighting an invisible system, a silent judgment of which I was no longer a part. And it was in this fragile state, deeply emotionally exhausted, that I made the mistake of letting my guard down. I agreed to go to a family dinner. They promised me it would be light, no pressure, a symbolic reunion. Just to talk, catch up, they said. But when I got there, I realized it was all a setup. In the middle of the table, as if it were the main course, were the documents again. This time, printed with the logo of a law firm, cold, formal, ready to be signed. "Helena," my father said in a polite tone, "let's settle this now, and then we can all go on in peace." It was like a punch in the stomach. I got up, I grabbed my bag, and I said only, "Your peace is not worth my dignity." That night, as I drove home with teary eyes and trembling fingers on the steering wheel, a certainty grew within me. I was alone, but not defenseless. And something inside me was finally beginning to awaken. There are silences that scream. And at that stage in my life, the silence inside me seemed deafening. After that dinner, or rather that family trap disguised as reconciliation, I collapsed emotionally without even realizing it. I continued going to work, attending hearings, meeting my deadlines, but I was a ghost of myself. My colleagues began to notice. "Are you okay, Helena? Did you sleep well last night?" Do you want to talk? And I just smiled with that automatic reflex of someone who has learned to endure everything in silence. At home, the days passed in a blur. I would sit in front of the television without really watching anything. I would forget pots on the stove. I would let clothes pile up in the washing machine. Even my favorite song, the one that always made me dance alone in the living room, Here Comes the Sun, sounded empty, colorless. I started having anxiety attacks at night. I would wake up with my heart racing, swearing there was someone in the room. It wasn't physical fear. It was my body screaming for everything my mind was trying to suppress. At that time, I even considered signing the papers. Not because I thought it was right, but because I was tired of fighting. Tired of being the only one who saw it as unfair. Tired of being the problem in the family. Tired of feeling guilty for saying no. Yes, guilt. Because my father had mastered the narrative so well that even though I was the responsible, honest, upright daughter, I was turned into a silent villain. And Lucas called as if nothing had happened. He made jokes. Hey, you still owe me a piece of land, huh? He laughed like someone secure in the throne of affection he had always occupied, while I struggled in emotional exile. The lowest point came on a Saturday afternoon. I received an unexpected visit. My Aunt Camila, my mother's sister. A woman with whom I had always had a warm relationship, but who had been distant lately. She brought a corn cake, as she used to do when I was a child, and entered without ceremony, as she always did. Helena, forgive me. I was negligent. That was the first thing she said. She sat down with me on the sofa and told me what no one had had the courage to say until then. The plan to take the land away from me had been in place since before my mother died. That my father had never accepted the fact that my paternal grandfather had chosen to leave me something directly. He thought it was disrespectful. He said it would cause imbalance in the family. My mother, according to her, tried to intercede. She tried to keep justice alive. But when she got sick, she lost her strength. And after she was gone, your father lost any restraint he had. It was as if a glass cracked inside me. Finally, someone validated the pain I had been swallowing. The certainty that all of this was not a delusion. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was manipulation. It was real injustice. And it was there, with my aunt holding my hand and tears streaming down my lap, that something began to change. Helena, if you give in now, they'll do this to you for the rest of your life. And your mother didn't raise you for that. She knew who you were. She trusted you. That sentence sparked something in me. It was as if my mother's voice was present in that room. As if she were saying, "You're still here. You can still get up." The following week, I made an appointment for therapy. The first session was tough. I could barely form complete sentences without feeling weak. But little by little, I started to listen to myself, and that hurt more than any words spoken aloud. I realized that for years I had tried so hard to be the ideal daughter, the exemplary professional, the strong woman. And in the process, I had forgotten that I also deserved protection, that I could also be vulnerable, that I also needed care. What's more, I realized that my fight with my father wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about something much deeper. It was about being seen, about being recognized, about not giving up who I was to fit into the narrow space my family had decided to reserve for me. And I decided there, on that couch, with my eyes swollen and my voice trembling, that I would not give in anymore. Not out of pride, but out of respect. For myself, for the memory of my mother, and for the woman I was becoming. Even in pieces, anger when it matures turns into discernment. I didn't cry as much as I used to. Not because it hurt less, but because the pain had changed form. It was no longer that constant dagger in my chest. Now it was a kind of resistance, firm, silent, like the trunk of a tree that stiffens after many storms. It was in this state that I received the invitation to the reconciliation lunch my father had organized. A last attempt, they said. A last effort to restore family ties. I hesitated to accept. My therapist said the decision should come from a place of strength, not guilt. And that week, for the first time, I felt I could go. But not as the daughter begging for acceptance. Instead, as a woman who finally knew her worth. I calmly chose my outfit. A navy blue dress my mother loved. I tied my hair back in a simple bun. I took a deep breath before leaving. I took with me not a gift, nor a forced smile, but my dignity. The lunch table was impeccable, as always. My father, Lucas, some cousins, and two distant uncles. Everyone sat as if at a formal meeting. The food was already served, but the tension still lingered on the cold plates. "Helena, thank you for coming," said my father, raising his glass with false enthusiasm. "We hope that today we can put the past behind us." I smiled slightly, but didn't respond. The table fell silent. He continued. "Lucas has everything ready. The automotive center project has been approved. All that's left is your signature to unlock the investment in the land, and of course to ensure that you are also remembered in this process." "Remembered?" I asked, my voice calm. "Yes, of course. We can include you as a minority partner, with a return proportional to your involvement." My brother nodded, as if it were a grand gesture. A gift. And that's when I felt it. That was the trigger. I got up from the table, calmly, without shouting, without crying. All my life I was taught to give in, to swallow my pride, to not be a problem, to be the responsible daughter, the reasonable sister, the woman who understands what's best for the family. But you confused my upbringing with submission, my kindness with weakness, my dignity with vanity. The expressions around me froze. This land is not just a plot of land. It is a symbol that, at some point, someone in this family recognized my value. And I will not give that up. Not for emotional blackmail, not for convenience, and certainly not for this charade of reconciliation. Lucas muttered something, perhaps a plea for calm. My father was silent, but there was no turning back. "You don't have to accept me. I didn't come here for that. I came because I deserved to look into the eyes of those who tried to erase me and tell them they failed. I am whole. And now, more than ever, I am aware of who I am." I grabbed my bag. And for the first time in years, I left that house without looking back. That same night, sitting on my couch, I made a decision. I was going to make it official. I would hire a lawyer, document the veiled threats, gather all the messages and records. It wasn't about fighting. It was about protecting what was mine, and protecting the woman I had fought so hard to become. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt clarity, and curiously, peace. Real change doesn't start with a grand gesture. It starts with small acts of courage, sometimes invisible, but deeply transformative. The week after lunch, my phone was silent. No calls from my father, no messages from Lucas, no requests to reconsider from uncles or cousins who, for years, had acted as silent mediators in the family hierarchy. It was as if I had been officially erased from the map. The daughter who dared to say no, the woman who stepped out of line, and that was okay. Because for the first time, this absence didn't scare me. It liberated me. I reorganized my days. I started going to therapy sessions more regularly. I took long walks by the sea. I rediscovered the peace of sitting in a cafe and reading a book without feeling like I should be solving something. At the same time, I put together a dossier with my lawyer. We gathered all the emails, audio recordings, conversation logs, and attempts at coercion. We formalized ownership of the land with asset protection guarantees. Any attempt to transfer it would now require not only my signature, but legal validation. My lawyer, Thomas, was clear. "Helena, you're not just defending a piece of land. You're reaffirming your own history. That's more valuable than any square meter." I cried right there in the office. Not because of the difficulties, but because, for the first time, someone looked at me as an adult who deserved respect. Not as someone who should give in for the good of others. I also sought emotional support more actively. I reconnected with two childhood friends whom I had lost touch with during the most intense years of work and family isolation. One of them, Clara, said something to me that I carry with me to this day. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Helena. Your loyalty to your values says it all." I also began to allow myself to dream again. I visited the land in Montecito, the same land my father wanted to give Lucas as a favor. It was more beautiful than I remembered. A wide field, old trees, and a view that touched the horizon. I took a folding chair, sat in the shade, and stayed there for hours. It was there that I thought, maybe this can be more than a symbol of resistance. Maybe it's the beginning of something new. The idea didn't come right away, but it germinated, to transform that space into a free legal aid center for women in vulnerable situations, a place where other women like me, who had been silenced, manipulated, excluded, could find a voice, support, and dignity. I talked about it with Thomas, and his eyes lit up. You want to turn inheritance into justice? I'm in. We started designing a project. It was still in its infancy, but I felt, deeply, that something was blossoming, that this land would indeed be the foundation of something much bigger than a family feud. It would be the seed of my reconstruction. Meanwhile, I remained firm in my decisions. I didn't respond to the provocations that occasionally appeared on social media. When a cousin posted a veiled message saying, "Those who don't honor their father don't deserve his name," I just took a deep breath and closed the app. The greatest honor I could give my family was to be who I was, truthfully, and not to carry a surname as a burden of submission. During this period, I took up playing the piano again, an old habit that my mother had always encouraged. Each note I played was like a confession, a silent catharsis. The pain was still there, of course. Losing ties is not easy, no matter how toxic they may have been. But now I was filling the empty spaces with something new: awareness, self-love, direction. The Helena who emerged from those days was lighter, more attentive, not because she had won a war, but because she had finally chosen not to live in trenches dug by others. The confrontation that changes everything is not the one that comes with shouting, punching the table, or dramatic phrases. The real confrontation is born from the silence that precedes the unshakable decision to never bow your head again. That day, it wasn't my father who came looking for me. It was his lawyer. I received a formal notice requesting a meeting about the property dispute involving members of the Vasquez family. Formal, cold, calculated. I knew it was his doing. One last move in an attempt to pressure me legally, perhaps to scare me, shame me, or even expose me. But this time, I was prepared. The meeting was scheduled in a neutral room at a mediation center in Santa Barbara. I arrived with Thomas, my lawyer, right on time. When I saw my father walk in, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Nothing. There was no fear, no hatred, not even hurt. There was only distance. The certainty that the man in front of me was no longer someone who defined who I was. He was just someone with whom I needed to end a cycle. "Helena," he began, in that diplomatic tone he always used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "This has all gone too far. You're hurting the family on a whim. That land—" I raised my hand. "Dad, with all due respect, let's not pretend this is about a piece of land. You wanted me to give up the only legacy I received directly from Grandpa because you thought I should continue to obey you, because you could never stand the fact that I didn't depend on you. And now, when you can't control my decision, you threaten me through lawyers." He took a deep breath, impatient. "Don't be dramatic. We're just trying to find a reasonable solution. No, you're trying to maintain control. But it's over. I'm no longer under your command." My eyes met his. "And what's more, if this persecution continues, I won't hesitate to take this case to court with all the documents I have in my possession. Emails, recordings, conversations with witnesses, attempts at coercion. I've prepared myself, Dad. And now, the only thing you can do is stop." Silence. He stared at me for a few seconds, and for a brief moment, his face wavered. Not because of the legal threat. He was too proud for that. But because, for the first time, I was no longer the daughter trying to please him. I was the woman he could no longer manipulate. "You've changed," he said, almost in a whisper. "No. I'm back to who I was before I diminished myself to fit your expectations." The meeting ended without an agreement, and I left with a light heart. For the first time in a long time, my stance was not a reaction. It was a decision. I wasn't fighting for attention, validation, or symbolic justice. I was simply living truthfully. In the days that followed, the family atmosphere cooled completely. Lucas didn't contact me. Some relatives cut off contact. Others sent ambiguous messages. "We're sad about all this, but we're rooting for you." As if they were cheering from afar, without the courage to take a stand. That's okay. Because when you break the power dynamic, you also lose some of the structures that sustained the oppression. And that hurts. But it also liberates. I actually started the Legal Aid Center project. I filed the paperwork to turn the land into a social space. I gathered partners, contacts, and even an architect who was moved by the proposal. "You want to turn pain into shelter. That's so beautiful," she said. And you know what's even more curious? With every symbolic brick I laid in that new project, the past weighed less and less on me. I no longer had to prove anything to my father, or to Lucas, or to any surname. I just needed to be true to the woman who, even though wounded, never stopped fighting for dignity. Today, when I enter the land in Montecito, I no longer see just trees, grass, and the horizon. I see lives, paths, hope. The work is still in its early stages, but the shelter already has a name. Casa Dolores, in honor of the woman who taught me to be strong without losing my tenderness. To my mother, who planted in me the roots of dignity that sustain me to this day. When I revealed the name, many people asked me, "So you forgave your father?" And the truth is, it's not about forgiveness. It's about freedom. Yes, I still carry scars. Some memories still sting. Sometimes when I hear a song or receive a message from a distant cousin, my heart skips a beat. There are days when the silence of my family's absence weighs heavily on me, but it no longer paralyzes me. I discovered that rebuilding yourself is not about erasing the past. It's about making peace with it. It's about transforming it into a solid foundation for something new. And I built that new place within myself. Casa Dolores will be a space for listening, welcoming, and providing legal guidance to women who, like me, were erased in environments where they should have been seen. Women who were pressured to remain silent to preserve structures that did not include them. Women who said no and were punished for it. These women will now have a place to start over, and so will I. I only heard from others that my father never mentioned the land again, that he still tries to justify his actions as leadership decisions, that he continues to treat Lucas as his sole heir, and that little by little, even those who supported him are seeing him for who he always was, a man who confused love with control. Lucas? He never contacted me again. And deep down, that hurt me. Because for many years, despite everything, he was my brother, my childhood friend. But today I understand. I cannot save someone who does not want to break out of the cycle they live in. My responsibility is not to what he lost. It is to what I decided to preserve. My inheritance was not a piece of land. It was the awareness of who I am. It was the strength to say no when everyone expected obedience. It was the courage to step out of the role of the daughter who pleases and take on the role of the woman who builds. And that is what I want to leave here, if anyone is reading. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not ungrateful for refusing to be manipulated. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are human and worthy. Today, every night, I light a small candle in the window of my apartment. A simple ritual, in memory of my mother, in honor of my history, and as a sign that the light is still on, even after the longest nights. And when I look at that flickering flame, I think, they tried to extinguish me, but all they managed to do was light me up.